Hey folks, today I wanted to post what most people really never show you, and that's if you ever wind up having a bunch of dead worms. And these here, my bins up here, this is all from they've been in here in the winter time, and I didn't really maintain these real good. The bins got a little dry, and one thing about it, if you got a wet bin and you let it dry out once, sometimes even if it rapidly dries, the worms will actually lay more cocoons. But it seems to me, which I may be wrong, if you let these bins stay a little on the dry side, you'll actually get a lot less cocoons and the worms crawl out. And like I said, this is only a small amount of them. There's probably, and these are dry by the way, it's probably good. There even some behind me, there's probably a good couple of pounds of dead worms. When they dry out, they're nothing. I mean, they just kind of like dry rubber bands, but they don't disappear, they're just dehydrated. But you got to kind of watch for this, because it don't matter the kind of worm you got. Any worm, if the conditions get wrong, they'll flee. Or even if the condition is right, such as like if a rain's coming, a tropical depression, stuff like that, the worms can actually flee your worm bins. Because the thing about it is, worms hadn't been there as long as being stupid. When they get feeling that there's danger, whether you got some food in there that's overheating or whatever, they're going to get out of there so they can try to survive. And in certain conditions, they will lay a lot more cocoons. But it's best to try to maintain your worm bin so you don't have this kind of problem. Another thing I failed to mention is when you're processing these worm bins, and it's a lot of times it's best to do it earlier in the day, because right at dark, whenever you mess with these worms and then you get the sides of this bin wet, the worms can actually crawl out a lot easier, and they have more reason to, because they've been disturbed. It's better to let them have a while to sit, calm back down. And this here is just one of the batches I've been processing with this screening method here. You can get out most cocoons. A lot of people don't screen, but I do. Like I say, you get this stuff below this, you're good to go. But this bin actually got a little too dry over the winter. If you keep these bins a lot more mucky and keep them nice and moist, they tend to stay in there. If you let them start getting on the dry side, the worms tend to start crawling out. So it helps you to have them a little on the wet side. But this is just some of what I've been processing. So like I said, this is ready for my plants. And I'm also going to be using this on my yard, making some compost tea. So I'm going to be processing all these bins. And like I say, this right here is ready. And this right here is one of my Euro buckets. I had one I started my Wally World experiment in. I had 40 worms in. I've split it to 4 or 5 gallon buckets, and it works really well. If you drill holes, it takes a bunch of them. This one is all 1/16 holes, but as you look around this bucket, that's a bunch of holes. You get plenty of airflow through there, and even European night crawlers can go through these holes. So don't ever think, even with window screen, you're not going to get worms coming through it, because they can go through that smaller hole. But next time, I'm going to try to, instead of drilling the sides of the bucket, I'm going to try to drill all my holes over here in these Lowe's brand buckets, because they have these ridges right here. And even if you set another bucket on top, all the air can come through these holes here. And if you decide for some reason you want to use these buckets for something else, you didn't ruin them with all these holes, because it kind of reduces down what you can use these buckets on. If you do these lids instead of wasting this bucket, you got a lid you just got to deal with. But these Euros is fixing to get too hot for them, so I'm actually going to have to put them under my house. And also another thing about these buckets, especially with European night crawlers, you can put a little extra water in here, and these buckets will actually, even with these air holes, they'll be good for a month. That water stays in there, and when you open it up, depending on the amount of worms, these things will be processed. But here where I live, it gets so hot that the Europeans will start dying if I leave them out in the outside, so you got to try to keep them as cool as you can here. If you're in the 80s or below, you're alright, but when you start getting into the 90s, 100, these worms are going to die on you. I know, because I've killed quite a few of them. But anyway, I reckon that's it for now.